The door that closed on me, I remember the moment everything ended, as if time itself slowed down just to make sure I would feel every second of it. The air felt heavy and still, like the world had paused to watch me fall apart. I stood there at the doorway of the house that once felt like my entire universe, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own voice as I tried to speak. "Please just listen to me," I said, my words soft but desperate, like someone trying to hold on to the last thread of something already slipping away. But he did not respond. He did not even look at me, his eyes cold, distant, unfamiliar, like I was standing in front of a stranger instead of the man I had trusted with everything. The man who once held my face gently and told me I was his home, the man who promised me forever, now stood there like I was nothing more than a burden he wanted to get rid of. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through me like a blade. "My wife, family is moving, and there is no space for you anymore. No space." Those words echoed inside my mind over and over again like a cruel joke, because everything around us, every wall, every corner, every memory in that house had been built by me. I had worked for years, sacrificing sleep, sacrificing comfort, sacrificing pieces of myself just to build something stable, something safe, something we could call ours. I believed in him, I believed in us, and that belief blinded me to the truth that had been slowly growing in the shadows behind him. I noticed him then, standing just a few steps away, his wife, her expression calm, almost satisfied, and behind her, her family moving inside like they already owned the place, their bags, their laughter, their careless glances. It was like I had already been erased from the story, like I had never existed in the first place. I felt something break inside me, not loudly, not violently, but quietly, like glass cracking under pressure. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him how he could do this, how he could stand there and throw me away like I meant nothing, but the words would not come out. They stayed stuck in my throat, heavy and painful. I looked down at the small bag in my hand, the only thing he allowed me to take, just a few clothes, a few personal items reduced to almost nothing in a matter of minutes. All the years, all the memories, all the love condensed into something so small it felt insulting. I took a step back. My feet felt weak, like they did not want to carry me away from the place that held so much of me, but I forced myself to move because staying would only make it worse. Staying would mean begging, and I refused to beg, not anymore. As I stepped outside, I felt the warmth of the house disappear, instantly replaced by a cold emptiness that wrapped around me like a reminder of what I had just lost. I turned around one last time, hoping maybe, just maybe, he would stop me. Maybe he would realize what he was doing. Maybe he would remember who I was to him. But he did not move. He did not speak. He just stood there watching me like I was someone he no longer recognized. And then the door closed. The sound was not loud, but it echoed through me like thunder, final, absolute, unforgiving. In that moment I realized something that hurt more than anything else. It was not just the house I had lost, it was the illusion of love, the illusion of belonging, the illusion that I mattered to him. I stood there for a while, staring at the door, my mind refusing to accept what had just happened, my heart trying to catch up with reality. The street was quiet, the sky above me dull and gray, like it mirrored the emptiness inside me. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, the betrayal, the shock, the pain, all mixing together into something overwhelming, something suffocating. I wanted to collapse right there on the ground. I wanted to disappear, but instead I took a deep breath and forced myself to walk forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was dragging an invisible weight behind me. I did not know where I was going. I did not have a plan. I just knew I could not stay there. I walked past familiar streets, places that once held happy memories, now feeling distant and like they belonged to another life, another version of me who no longer existed. I kept replaying his words in my head, "There is no space for you anymore," and each time they cut deeper, because they were not just about the house, they were about me, about my place in his life, about how easily I had been replaced. I wondered when things had started to change, when the warmth had turned into coldness, when the love had turned into indifference. But deep down I already knew the truth. I had ignored the signs, the late nights, the distance, the way he stopped looking at me, the way his words lost their meaning. I had seen it all, but I chose to believe in the version of him that no longer existed, and now I was paying the price. I stopped walking when my legs could not carry me any further. I found myself near a quiet park, the kind of place where people go to think or to escape or to heal, but in that moment it felt like none of those things were possible. I sat down on a bench, my hands resting in my lap, my eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Everything felt unreal, like I was trapped in a nightmare I could not wake up from. I tried to make sense of it all, tried to understand how someone could change so completely, how someone could look at you with love one day and with nothing the next, but there was no answer. Only silence, and that silence was louder than anything else. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes, I could not tell. Time had lost its meaning. I sat there replaying every moment, every memory, searching for something, anything that could explain what had happened. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the truth was simple and painful. He had chosen them over me. He had chosen convenience over loyalty. He had chosen a new life, and I no longer had a place in it that realization should have broken me completely, but instead something else began to form beneath the pain, something small, something quiet but powerful, a spark of awareness, a spark of clarity. I had lost everything, but I had also been set free. Free from illusions, free from someone who did not value me, free from a life that was built on something fragile, something temporary. I did not feel strong in that moment. I did not feel brave or confident. I felt broken, lost and alone, but deep inside me something had shifted. Something had awakened, and even though I could not fully understand it, yet I knew one thing for sure: the story was not over, not for me, not yet. The door had closed, but somewhere, somehow, another one would open, and this time I would walk through it as someone different, someone who would never allow herself to be treated like that again, someone who would never forget her worth, no matter how hard someone tried to make her feel small. I wiped my tears, slowly stood up and looked ahead. The road was uncertain, the future unclear, but for the first time since that door closed, I felt a faint sense of direction, not a clear path, not a perfect plan, but a quiet determination to keep moving forward, because even though I had been pushed out, even though I had been betrayed, even though everything I had built had been taken from me, I was still here, and that meant something. That meant I still had a chance to rebuild, to rise, to become something stronger than I had ever been before. And as I took my first step away from that place, away from that past, I made a silent promise to myself: I would not let this be the end of me. I would not let their choices define my worth. I would not let this pain go to waste, because one day I would look back at this moment not as the day I lost everything, but as the day I began to find myself again. The truth: they never knew that night the world felt colder than it ever had before, and not just because of the air that brushed against my skin, but because something inside me had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow space that echoed with every thought. I sat alone on a worn-out bench under a dim streetlight, its flickering glow barely strong enough to hold back the darkness around me, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel everything without distraction, without denial, without pretending that things were fine, because they were not fine. Nothing was fine. I had been thrown out of my own life like I was nothing, and now I had to face the reality of what that truly meant. I could have gone somewhere safe. I could have called someone who cared. I could have found a temporary place to rest, but I did not do any of that, because a part of me believed that I deserved to sit in that moment, to understand it fully, to let the pain settle deep into my bones so I would never forget what it felt like to be discarded like that. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold together the pieces that felt like they were falling apart, my mind replaying every second of what had happened, the way he looked at me, the way his voice sounded, the way the door closed without hesitation, and each memory hit me like a wave, pulling me deeper into a sea of realization that I had been blind. For far too long I had trusted him completely, without question, without doubt. I had believed every word he said, every promise he made, every reassurance he gave me, and in doing so I had ignored the quiet warnings that tried to reach me, the small changes in his behavior, the distance that grew between us, the way his attention shifted away from me. Slowly but steadily I had noticed it all, but I convinced myself that it was nothing, that it would pass, that love would fix everything, because that is what I wanted to believe. And now here I was sitting alone in the dark, forced to accept that love alone had never been enough. As the hours passed, the noise of the city faded into the background, leaving me alone with my thoughts, and in that silence something began to change. The pain was still there, sharp and heavy, but beneath it there was something else, something calmer, something clearer, like a fog slowly lifting from my mind. I started to think, not emotionally, but logically, not as someone who had just been betrayed, but as someone who needed to understand what to do next. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up my face, revealing the exhaustion in my eyes, the countless missed calls and unread messages that I had ignored until now. For a moment I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face whatever waited for me on the other side of that screen, but then I took a deep breath and unlocked it. My fingers moved slowly, at first scrolling through notifications that felt distant and unimportant, until one message caught my attention. It was an email from a legal firm, the subject line simple, yet enough to make my heart skip a beat. I opened it carefully, my eyes scanning each word as my pulse quickened, and with every sentence I read, something inside me began to shift. The confusion, the helplessness, the despair, all of it started to give way to something else, something stronger, something unexpected. Understanding. The email referred to documents, agreements, ownership details. Things I had not thought about in a long time, things I had trusted him to handle back when I believed we were building a future together. But as I read further, the truth became impossible to ignore. The house, the very house I had been thrown out of, was not fully in his name. The process that was supposed to transfer everything had never been completed. There had been delays, technical issues, signatures that were never finalized, and because of that, the legal ownership remained tied to me. I read the Email again just to be sure, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear this time, but from the realization of what this meant. He had believed that everything belonged to him. He had acted with complete confidence, thinking he had the power to remove me from that space, but the reality was very different. The reality was that he had no right to do what he did, and for a moment I just sat there staring at the screen, letting it sink in, letting the truth settle into my mind like a quiet but powerful wave. I felt something rise within me, not anger, not revenge, but clarity, a kind of calm strength that I had not felt in a long time, because for the first time since everything happened I was not powerless. I had something real, something solid, something that could not be taken away by words or emotions. I leaned back against the bench, looking up at the sky, the darkness above no longer feeling as suffocating as it did before, because now I could see a way forward. It was not easy, it was not simple, but it was there, and that was enough. I spent the rest of the night thinking, planning, piecing together everything I knew, everything I needed to do. I remembered the paperwork, the meetings, the decisions I had made back when I first bought the house. I remembered how careful I had been, how determined I was to secure my future, and in that moment I realized something important. I had not been weak back then. I had been smart. I had protected myself in ways I did not even fully understand at the time, and now those choices were about to protect me again. As the first light of morning began to appear, the world around me slowly waking up. I stood up from the bench, my body tired, but my mind clearer than it had been in days. I was no longer the person who stood at that door begging to be heard. I was no longer the person who believed she had nothing left. I was someone who had been pushed to the edge, but had found something valuable in that fall, the truth. I walked into a nearby cafe, the warmth inside a sharp contrast to the cold night I had just endured. I ordered a simple cup of coffee, my hand steady now as I sat down and opened my phone again, this time with purpose. I replied to the email confirming my identity, requesting further details, setting things in motion. With each message I sent, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control of my own story. I was not rushing. I was not acting out of impulse. I was taking my time, understanding every step, making sure that when the moment came I would be ready, fully prepared, fully aware of what I was doing, because this was not just about getting something back. This was about reclaiming what was mine in every sense of the word. The hours passed quickly as I made calls, gathered information, reviewed documents, every piece of the puzzle falling into place more clearly than I had expected, and with each confirmation, each detail verified, my confidence grew, not in a loud or arrogant way, but in a quiet, steady way that came from knowing the truth, from understanding the reality of the situation. They thought I was gone. They thought I had nothing. They thought they could erase me from that house, from that life, without consequence, but they were wrong, and soon they would find out just how wrong they were. I finished my coffee and stepped outside, the sun now fully risen, the light touching everything around me in a way that felt almost symbolic, like a new beginning, like a reminder that even after the darkest night something bright could still emerge. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs, grounding me in the present moment, and as I began to walk again I felt different, not completely healed, not completely unaffected, but changed, stronger, more aware, more certain of who I was and what I deserved. I did not know exactly how everything would unfold, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would not let what happened define me. I would not let their actions be the end of my story, because the truth was now in my hands, and with it came a power they never expected, a power they never saw coming in. When the time was right, when everything was in place, I would use that truth not to destroy them, but to show them exactly who I really was, someone they should have never underestimated, someone they should have never pushed aside, someone who would rise from this not broken but unshakable. And as I walked forward into that new day, I carried that truth with me like a quiet promise, the truth they never knew was about to change everything. The day everything turned, a week passed, and in that time I changed more than I had in years, not on the outside where the world could easily notice, but inside, where strength quietly replaces pain and clarity takes the place of confusion. I no longer woke up with the same heavy feeling pressing down on my chest. I no longer replayed that moment at the door with the same helplessness. Instead, I carried something new, a quiet certainty that what had been taken from me was never truly lost, and that soon everything would begin to shift. I stood across the street from the house that once held every piece of my life, my hands steady, my breathing calm, my eyes focused on the place that had once been my safe space and then became the symbol of my betrayal. From a distance it looked almost unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else entirely. The front yard was filled with cars that were not mine. The windows were open, and I could hear loud voices, laughter, careless and proud, the kind of laughter that comes from people who believe they have won, who believe there is nothing left to challenge them. I watched as people moved freely in and out of the door, carrying things, rearranging the space as if they had always lived there, as if my presence had never existed, as if my memories had no value at all. For a brief moment a sharp pain rose in my chest, but I did not let it control me. I had already faced the worst part of this story. This was just the turning point, and I was ready. I crossed the street step by step, each movement deliberate, each breath measured. The closer I got, the clearer everything became. The sounds, the faces, the energy of that place. It was no longer warm. It was loud, crowded, restless, filled with a kind of arrogance that only comes from false security. I reached the door and paused for a second, not out of fear, but out of awareness, because I knew that once I knocked, everything would begin to change. I raised my hand and knocked firmly, the sound cutting through the noise inside. Within seconds, the door opened, and there he stood, his expression shifting the moment he saw me. First surprise, then irritation, then something sharper, something defensive. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice carrying the same coldness I had heard before, but this time it did not affect me the same way. This time I was not standing there as someone seeking approval or understanding. I was standing there with something far more powerful, truth. I met his eyes calmly, and for the first time I did not feel small. I did not feel uncertain. I simply said, "I came to check on my house." For a second there was silence, and then he laughed, not out of humor, but out of disbelief. "Your house," he said, shaking his head as if I had just said something ridiculous. "Stop embarrassing yourself. You have nothing here." His words might have broken me before. They might have made me doubt myself, question everything, but now they meant nothing, because I knew something he did not. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply stepped slightly to the side, and that was when everything shifted. Behind me stood two lawyers, dressed formally, their expressions neutral and composed, and beside them a court officer holding documents that carried more weight than any words spoken in anger. The moment he saw them, the confidence on his face began to fade. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing its sharp edge, replaced by uncertainty. One of the lawyers stepped forward, speaking clearly and professionally. "We are here to present a legal notice regarding this property. According to official records, this house is not solely owned by you. There is an active legal claim, and the primary ownership is still under her name." He paused just enough for the words to settle before continuing, "Which means you do not have the authority to remove her or to occupy this property without her consent." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. The laughter from inside stopped completely. The movement slowed, and one by one people began to gather near the entrance. His wife appeared behind him, her expression confused at first, then slowly turning into shock as the reality of the situation began to unfold. Her family, who had been so comfortable, so confident just moments ago, now stood still, their faces reflecting disbelief, fear, and uncertainty. "No, that is not possible," he said, his voice quieter now, almost desperate. "There must be a mistake. Everything was transferred. Everything is in my name." The lawyer calmly opened the file and showed the documents, explaining each detail with precision: the incomplete transfer, the missing signatures, the legal standing that still placed ownership in my hands. Every word dismantled the illusion he had been living in. Every sentence pulled away the ground beneath his confidence. I watched him carefully, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with clarity, because this moment was not about revenge in the way people usually imagine it. This was about truth finally revealing itself. I looked at him and spoke quietly but firmly, "The same way it was not possible for you to throw me out." I said the words, simple but powerful, carrying the weight of everything he had done. His wife stepped forward, her voice shaky, asking, "What does this mean? What is going to happen now?" The lawyer answered her directly, explaining that a legal process would follow, that the property was now under dispute, and that until the matter was resolved they had no right to treat it as their own. The shift in energy was immediate. The arrogance that once filled the space was gone, replaced by tension, whispers, confusion. People began making calls, trying to find solutions, trying to fix something that was already broken beyond their control. He turned to me again, this time his expression completely different, no longer cold, no longer confident, but uncertain, almost pleading. "We can talk about this," he said, trying to regain some sense of control. "We can fix this. There is no need to make it complicated." I held his gaze for a moment, seeing clearly now the person he had become and the choices he had made, and I realized something important. This was not sudden. This was not a mistake. This was the result of who he truly was, someone who only valued me when it was convenient, someone who believed I would always accept whatever he decided. I shook my head slightly, not out of anger, but out of finality. "It is already complicated," I said calmly. "You made sure of that." The court officer stepped forward, then handing over the official notice outlining the next steps, the legal timeline, the requirements that now had to be followed. There was no arguing with it, no dismissing it, no pretending it did not exist. It was real, and it had consequences. I stepped back, allowing them to process everything, allowing the weight of the situation to settle in fully, because this moment was not about shouting or proving a point. It was about letting reality speak for itself. I turned and walked away slowly, feeling their eyes on me, feeling the shift that had just taken place behind me. The same house, That once felt like a place of belonging, then became a place of rejection, had now become something else entirely, a place of truth, a place where everything hidden had come to light. As I reached the end of the street, I stopped for a second, looking back one last time, not with longing, not with regret, but with understanding, because I knew that from this point forward nothing would ever be the same, not for them and not for me. The power had shifted, the story had turned, and the people who once believed they had control were now facing a reality they never expected. And as I continued walking forward, I felt a quiet sense of strength settle within me, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and unshakable, because I had not forced this moment, I had not created it out of anger, I had simply allowed the truth to rise, and when it did, it changed everything in a way that no argument ever could. And that was the day everything turned, the day the silence broke, the day the illusion ended, and the day they finally realized that the person they had pushed aside was never as powerless as they believed, the revenge they never expected. In the days that followed, everything settled into a strange kind of silence, not the peaceful silence of comfort, but the heavy silence of realization, the kind that lingers in the air after truth has been revealed and nothing can go back to the way it was. I did not rush anything, I did not show anger or raise my voice, because I understood something important now. Real power does not need to be loud, it does not need to prove itself through chaos, it simply exists and lets others feel its weight on their own. I gave them time, not out of kindness, but out of intention, because I wanted them to fully understand what they had done and what they had lost. I wanted every single moment inside that house to remind them that they were living in a place that was never truly theirs, that every wall, every room, every memory carried my presence even when I was not physically there. The legal notice had made everything clear. They had 30 days to leave, 30 days to pack their belongings, 30 days to come to terms with the reality they had tried to ignore. At first they resisted, of course. They made calls, reached out to people, searched for ways to fight it, to delay it, to find some loophole that would allow them to stay, but the truth was stronger than their attempts, and slowly, one by one, their options disappeared, leaving them with nothing but time and consequences. I stayed away from the house during those days, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed to stand there to prove anything. The process was already in motion, and I trusted it completely. Instead, I focused on myself, on rebuilding the parts of me that had been neglected for so long. I found a small place to stay, simple but peaceful, a space that allowed me to think clearly without the noise of the past surrounding me. I began to create a new routine, waking up early, taking quiet walks, allowing my mind to settle and my thoughts to organize themselves in a way they had not been able to before. I realized how much of myself I had lost while trying to maintain something that was never stable to begin with, and now I had the chance to rediscover who I was without the weight of someone else's expectations. The days passed slowly but steadily, and with each passing day I could feel myself becoming stronger, not in a way that others could easily see, but in a deeper, more meaningful way. I was no longer defined by what had happened to me, I was defined by how I chose to move forward, and that choice was entirely mine. He tried to reach out more than once, messages, calls, even showing up at places he thought I might be, each time with the same tone, regret mixed with desperation, as if he had suddenly realized the value of something he once took for granted. I did not respond immediately because I needed to be sure that whatever I said came from a place of clarity and not emotion. And when I finally did meet him, it was not in anger or confrontation, it was in calm, controlled understanding. We stood facing each other in a quiet place, far from the noise of everything that had happened, and for a moment neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to justify. The truth was already there between us, visible, undeniable. I made a mistake, he said, his voice lower than I had ever heard it before. I should not have done that, I was wrong. I listened without interrupting, not because I needed his apology, but because I wanted to hear it fully, to understand it for what it was. And when he finished, I looked at him, not with the same love I once had, not with anger either, but with something entirely different, something stronger, acceptance. You did not make a mistake, I said calmly. You made a choice, and that choice showed me exactly where I stood in your life. He tried to speak again, to argue, to explain, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping him, because there was nothing more to discuss. The time for explanations had passed. What remained now were consequences and lessons learned. The 30 days came to an end quietly. There were no dramatic scenes, no loud arguments, no last-minute attempts to stay. They left one by one, their belongings packed, their presence fading from the house that had once been filled with their confidence. I arrived later that day, standing once again at the door that had been closed on me weeks ago, and for a brief moment I paused, not out of hesitation but out of awareness, because I understood the significance of this moment. I reached out and opened the door, stepping inside slowly. The air felt different, calmer, lighter, as if the house itself had been waiting for this return. I walked through each room, taking in the space, noticing the small changes they had made, the things they had moved, the traces of their time there, but none of it mattered, because beneath it all, the foundation was still mine, the essence of. The place still belonged to me. I moved through the house with a quiet sense of peace, touching the walls not to reclaim them but to reconnect with something. I had almost lost myself in the process, and as I stood in the center of the living room, I realized something profound. This was never just about the house, it was about me. It was about my worth, my strength, my ability to stand up for myself when everything seemed to fall apart. I had been pushed out, rejected, made to feel like I had nothing, and yet here I was standing stronger than before, not because I had taken something back, but because I had found something within myself that could never be taken away. People often think revenge is about causing pain, making others suffer the way you suffered, but that kind of revenge is temporary. It fades quickly, leaving behind nothing but more emptiness. What I chose was different. I chose to rise. I chose to rebuild. I chose to let my success, my strength, and my silence speak louder than any words ever could, and that was something they would carry with them far longer than any argument or confrontation. As I opened the windows, letting fresh air fill the space, I felt a sense of closure settle over me, not the kind that ends a story, but the kind that completes a chapter, allowing something new to begin. I did not know exactly what the future held, but I was no longer afraid of it because I knew that whatever came next, I would face it with the same strength that had brought me through this. I walked out into the yard, the sunlight warm against my skin, and for the first time in a long time I allowed myself to smile, not because everything was perfect, but because I had made it through something that once felt impossible. I had faced betrayal, loss, and uncertainty, and I had come out stronger, wiser, and more certain of who I was and what I deserved. And as I stood there taking in that moment, I understood the true meaning of what had happened. This was not just a story about being thrown out and taking something back. It was a story about transformation, about discovering strength in the face of pain, about realizing that sometimes the worst moments in life are the ones that lead you to your greatest growth. They thought they had taken everything from me. They thought I would disappear, quietly fade into the background of their lives, but instead I became someone they would never forget, not because I sought revenge in the way they expected, but because I showed them something far more powerful. I showed them that I could lose everything and still rise, that I could be pushed aside and still stand strong, that I could walk away from what once defined me and create something even better in its place. And that was the revenge they never expected, not loud, not destructive, but undeniable and lasting, because in the end I did not just reclaim a house, I reclaimed myself, and that was something no one could ever take away from me again.